This week finds out in an hour. First on BBC One, a chance for tonight's audience to grill the panel.
Here we are in Glasgow, and welcome to Question Time. And thank you for joining us, whether you're watching on television, listening to us, whether you're here in our audience, and indeed on our panel. Our panel of 6 this week: the Liberal Democrat Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander; Scotland's Minister for Europe and International Development, Humza Yousaf of the Scottish National Party; Labour's Deputy Leader in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale; the Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson; the Associate Editor of The Spectator, Toby; and the crime writer who sold more than 10 million books, Val McDermid. Can it be true? I suppose it's true. It must be true. Join in the debate tonight as we start on these topics. Remember, you can use text or Twitter. Our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981, and you can push the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question is from Valerie Gord, please.
Televised leaders' debates. Is David Cameron a big feisty?
Well... Ruth Davidson, is David Cameron a big feirty?
I don't think it's fear. I think it's frustration as much as anything else. We're 62 days out from probably the most important general election in a generation, and we're still fighting about who gets to stand left of the lectern. Is the DUP allowed in or not? I think this afternoon they said they were going to take a judicial review of it, so it's all going into the courts. I mean, I think that this has been an absolute Horlicks from start to finish, and what we need to have is probably what they have in the States, as an independent panel that decides what the rules are months in advance, not days in advance.
But he's the only one who's standing out against it. Everybody else has agreed they'll go and debate.
Well, he says he wants to make sure that the DUP is allowed in, which, given that they have as many MPs as Plaid Cymru and SNP put together, who are both allowed in, it does seem a little bit unfair that the DUP aren't.
Wait a minute, he never fought for the SNP for the right to debate, and also he ran away from Alex Salmond during the referendum.
He fought for the Green Party to be allowed to be in, and they are. And he's put forward proposals today for what he's going to do.
Danny Alexander.
Yeah, I think it is fear, probably. I'm not sure if it's fear or complete cynicism about the process. I think David Cameron should man up and get involved in these debates. I think it's pretty pathetic, to be honest, when we've got a very important general election coming up. We should have the leaders of all the parties prepared to debate with one another, as we all are tonight, from different parties and none, engaged in that discussion. I'm not sure that he wants to be on the same place answering questions from Nigel Farage, Nick Clegg or Ed Miliband, or indeed Nicola Sturgeon for that matter. And I think it's about time that... I think people expect, actually, that these debates should take place, because it's part of the democratic process. It shouldn't dominate the election campaign, of course, but it should be an important part of it.
So what's your colleague in the coalition afraid of?
Well, it's unclear whether it's Farage...
Your record? Or
whether it's Farage, fear, Miliband, meltdown, or Clegg conniptions, which is putting him off taking part in these debates. But, look, he wants the debate to take place before the manifestos have even been launched, so he clearly doesn't want to defend his policies for the next Parliament. I think that there's an interest, probably from both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, to have a very sanitised election campaign, so there's not the scrutiny that there should be of each party's ideas and policies, and indeed record. So I just think it's not very impressive.
OK. Toby.
Well, he's agreed to one debate, so if he was for it, why would he agree to that? I think he's right to rule out any more debates, because the problem with having 2 or 3 televised debates during the general election campaign is that it can become a bit of a sideshow. The media focuses on the issues that turn people off politics, like who looks the best, who had the sharpest soundbite. You know, we're facing one of the gravest geopolitical crises in Europe since the outbreak of the Second World War, and here we are having a debate about debates. I think that what we need to do is we need to focus on who the strongest leader is, who's going to make the best decisions about what's right for our country, and the way to make that decision is to look at their track record in government, look at their plans for the future, not see who performs better in a 90-minute gladiatorial contest.
To be honest, I don't really blame the Prime Minister. You know, it turns into a 60-minute screaming match after a while, so I think it become a bit of a turn-off rather than, you know, trying to engage the electorate.
So you think they shouldn't happen at all? Or
well, I think the one with the 7 leaders is quite good, but I think anything more than that would, you know, turn into an individual screaming match between Ed Miliband and David Cameron.
So you're on his side, really? You want what he wants. Val McDermid, what do you think?
Well, I think with 7 or 8 different politicians on a platform for 90 minutes, it's not going to be any kind of debate. It's going to be a soundbite slanging match. I would like to see more structured debates. And indeed, in the run-up to the referendum in Scotland last year, we had a series of debates, not just with the leaders, but with different people as well, both official members of political parties and those not. And people watched those. People were energised in this country. People were politicised in a way that they've never been in my lifetime. And I think with the proper balance of debates and not just 90 minutes where they can all slag each other off, then we could actually get people energised south of the border in the way they were north of the border last year.
You sit up there, the spectacles.
I don't know why he's refusing to debate with Ed Miliband. I mean, in my opinion, the Conservatives have a record they can defend. They have falling unemployment, fast-growing economy in the G7, and Britain's become the job factories of Europe. And the long-term economic plan is working. So I don't know why David Cameron is not willing to go on TV and defend his policies against Ed Miliband.
So you'd be there if you were leading the party?
I'd give it a go. So, yeah.
Yeah, good. Kezia, Dugdale.
I think David Cameron's just playing chicken. I don't understand why he's not turning out for these debates. And like Val said, the referendum was full of debates, televised debates, town hall debates, and it was very much a good thing for our democracy. It meant people could make informed choices, they could study the facts, they could come to their own conclusion. To the guy in the middle, you don't have to watch. That's the beauty of the television. If you don't like what you see, you can turn over. But I think the vast majority of people want access to the TV debates and want to see what their political parties stand for and whether they're worth voting for.
Kezia. Humza, do you think they're going to happen? Yeah, I mean, do you expect them to happen? Do you expect there'll be the one, Humza?
Well, I hope there's more than that. I mean,
but do you think there will be that one that he's suggesting? He's suggesting a different one for everybody else.
Of course, we'll take part in any debates
against
anywhere. Anybody, anywhere, any time.
Yeah.
I disagree slightly with the chap in the spectacles who made the remark, because it's not because of his record that he doesn't want to turn up. It's not because he thinks his record is successful. The reason why he's feared running away is precisely because he knows his record has put more people in poverty than any other government has ever done before. And what I say... let me just say this, that I hope the broadcasters will stand firm, because it's not a good thing when a Prime Minister tries to dictate to broadcasters what they should and shouldn't do. I remember seeing this episode of this infamous episode of Have I Got News For You when Royce Hattersley refused to come and they just put a tub of lard there. Maybe they should just put a plate of eaten mess or something instead of the Prime Minister, but they should just take care of
I think the televised debates are important. Just last week, the Lib Dems vetoed the Lord Saatchi's Medical Innovation Bill, which a lot of critically ill children and cancer patients are wholly reliant on to get access quickly to life-saving drugs. And so to rely on politicians debating at Westminster isn't simply working at the moment, because the Lib Dem party decided to veto it with no explanation.
And you, sir, on the left there, then we'll go on. Yes.
Are the leaders' debates even that important? In 2010, the Lib Dems quite clearly won, but ended up only gaining 1% more of the votes and actually losing seats. Should we not be talking about policies and things that are actually going to make a difference, and not, as Toby said, a debate about a debate?
Right, OK. And let's leave a debate about a debate and go on to something else. Isabel Bongali, please. Isabel.
If a large contingent of SNP MPs are elected at the general election, what effect will this have on the UK Parliament?
If a large contingent of SNP MPs, then talking now on the polls of 56 out of 59, I think was the latest poll today. If they're elected at the general election, what effect is this going to have on the UK Parliament? Kezia, you start on this.
Well, look, that's very much what's going to happen based on the polls that have come out this week. They are terrible polls for the Labour Party, and they are fantastic polls for David Cameron. There's no excusing that. It's not rubbish. The biggest party, David, the biggest party forms the government. It's been that way since the 1930s, since the Second World War. That's just the reality of the situation. The more SNP MPs that make it to Parliament, the greater chance David Cameron has of getting back behind that door in number 10. And let me just say this. There's a lot of news reports this week about the trouble the Labour Party's in, the damage this is causing and all the rest of it in my party. This isn't about the future of my party. This is about what the cost, the price of 5 more years of the Tories is. I'm not prepared to stand for that. So I'm going to campaign week in, week out, day in, day out to get David Cameron out of number 10 and let's start getting a fairer, more progressive country back.
Just dealing with the SNP issue, why then did you say, I've no qualms whatsoever about working with the SNP, I'm not tribal?
I don't consider myself a tribal politician. I think a lot of people want to see their politicians working together. But
so you would work with us in Westminster?
Let me say that, and we'll come on to the SNP in a wee second. What I'm setting out to do is to win a Labour majority.
Yeah, but we should be on the SNP, because that was the question. It wasn't about Labour, it was about the SNP. So Humza's quite right. The question was, if there's a large contingent of SNP, and you've admitted yourself the polls are looking that way, what effect will it have on the UK Parliament? Ruth, maybe you'd answer that.
Well, I think Ed Miliband...
Do you accept what she says, that it will let the Tories in if the SNP does well up here?
Well, no, because Humza and I are quite clear about the fact there will be no deal between our parties after the general election, no matter what the result is. You've heard the words and read them back to Kezia of what she said. You've had the Deputy Leader of the SNP saying it would be silly not to have a deal. You've had Ed Miliband asked about this again and again and again, and he's refused to rule it out. But you know what? Let's not talk about divvying up the voters just yet, because we've not asked them to vote yet. And despite all of this tactical voting, get so-and-so, vote so-and-so, get so-and-so, what I say to voters at home is vote for the party you believe in. Vote for the policies you believe in. Vote for the Prime Minister you want. Vote for the MP that you want for your seat. And you know what? You'll walk out of the voting booth with your head held
Yeah, but
high.
that doesn't answer the question. But that's fine. But on the present reckoning, according to the polls, that means in Scotland, 56 SNP MPs are going to be returned, with people holding their head up high.
Well, on the polls of 8 seats yesterday being extrapolated out, I think that there is a lot of politics to go between now and May.
Okay.
And I think, David, everybody in this audience will understand how quickly politics is moving in Scotland right now. Not just before September, but after September too. So I'm not taking anyone for granted in Scotland. We came out of the referendum with a spring in our step. We're the only pro-UK party that's actually going into this election with a positive story to tell, saying if you want a strong Scotland within the UK, if you want to keep a strong economy, then vote for the Scottish Conservatives. That's the pro-party message I'm taking. What you should vote for, not who you should vote against.
So there are a lot of hands up, and I'll come to you in a second, but Humza, for the SNP, if this poll turns out to be anywhere near right, if they're 50, 56, whatever it is, and you do in effect have a wedge in Westminster, what effect is it going to have on UK government?
A positive effect. I mean, we, like all the other panellists, certainly believe that the election in 62 days' time, there's a lot of politics to still go. We don't at all take anything for granted. In fact, we will have to work our socks off to get that kind of result, and we're prepared to do that. But it will have a positive effect.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you. Supposing the Conservatives have the largest number of MPs in the House of Commons, and you say you won't work with them, then what?
Yeah, sure. That's exactly what I was going to go on before you interjected, was that, look, as Ruth said, absolutely no deal whatsoever, and any informal or formal type of deal with the Conservatives. In terms of working with Labour, yes, we would look at issue by issue. We certainly probably wouldn't do a coalition, as the First Minister has previously said. Looking at an issue-by-issue basis, yes, we would do that. But when I take umbrage with what Kezia said is on this point, that she says that the people have abandoned Labour. It's not. The reason you're getting a hammering is because the Labour Party has abandoned the people. And the point is very, very clear. Going to David's point, let me address David's point. When we look at issue by issue, the First Minister has made it very clear. The SNP is standing on an anti-austerity agenda. We don't believe that you can successfully grow the economy on the backs of the poor. What we will do is put forward an anti-austerity plan. What we'll do is, with the other progressive parties in Westminster, the Greens, perhaps the Welsh Nationalists, put together a policy progressive agenda. Roll out the living wage across the United Kingdom and don't spend £100 billion on the obscenity of nuclear trident missiles.
You've just made a very, very strong claim to be a progressive party, yet you haven't got a single progressive tax policy. Until last week, you were all for cutting corporation tax. Compare it to the Labour proposals. If you're talking about seriously being against austerity, you would increase taxes on those who are wealthy.
Right.
You're talking about a 50p tax, a mansion tax, a banker's bonus
Let's
tax.
not go down the route of what you're going to be saying over the next
But it matters because he's saying he's a progressive
Yes.
politician.
No, but we're not talking about the effect.
If you agree with our progressive policies, then of course, issue by issue, you will get that support. And the point is this, the irony is the policies that we're putting forward, Kezia, the policies we're putting forward were policies that the old Labour Party would have agreed with. The irony is this, you've managed to find yourself on the right side of the Tories and the wrong side of the Scottish people.
You haven't answered my question. I think Alex Salmond once said that it was the party with the largest number of MPs that had the right to rule. So if the Tories have the largest number of MPs, you're going to frustrate that right? What are you going to do?
No, as I said, we will do no support, give no support whatsoever to the Tories. And an issue by issue basis...
Even if it meant another election? Even if it meant another election following?
We would be prepared, on an issue by issue basis, to look at working with the Tories, with the Labour parties. It's exactly the... That'll get me in trouble. Yeah, so that ministerial career of mine lasted about, a good couple of...
All right, OK,
with the Labour Party.
Let me hear from some members of the audience. The person there in the centre, you, yes.
To Mr Yousaf, how can you say that you will not back the Tories in a Westminster government when it's a well-known fact that the Scottish Conservatives, which Ruth leads, have backed a number of your policies when you were a minority government in the Scottish Parliament? Because that's just you turning your back on them.
So did Labour and so did the Lib Dems. That's what we do in a minority.
OK, just answer. Let me chair this, not you. You answer his question, if you would. Yousaf? You're silent. Can you ask his...
Oh, sorry, I thought you were pointing to the audience. No, we were a minority government, and clearly in a minority government we got support from the Labour Party, we got support from the Lib Dems. The point is this, we are ruling out unequivocally, unambiguously any type of support for the Tories.
OK, fine.
What we want to do is work with the Green parties and the other progressive parties to put forward a progressive agenda that is anti-austerity.
In other words, it's different from what happened in Scotland, what will happen in Westminster. The man up there on the left, please, you, sir. Yeah, yes, you.
I'm really surprised to hear Kezia Dugdale trotting out the same old mantra about if you want to keep Tories out of Westminster to vote Labour. It hasn't done any good in the past 6 months. Lord Ashcroft's second poll just proved that. It's time to change the record. It's getting broken. I think only twice since the war has it made a difference in Scotland to what government gets sent to Westminster. We voted in 50 Labour MPs in 2010. We got the Conservatives. During the Thatcher years, same thing happened, and it made no difference to the people of Scotland.
Bernie Alexander.
Well, I don't think it would have a positive effect. I think you can see in the Scottish Parliament the way the SNP government has taken their eye off the ball, some of the key issues in public services in Scotland. You can see the problems in the NHS in Scotland, for example. You can see, certainly from my part of the world, in the Highlands and Islands, it may be different here in Glasgow, many of the key issues that people are concerned about, whether it's investment in the transport system, whether it's supporting the NHS in the Highlands, those are things that have been set to one side by the SNP that's more interested in having the sorts of rows that we've seen between Humza and Kezia just now.
But what would the effect be if this happens?
I don't think it would have a positive effect, because
you wouldn't be there, according to the polls, either, would you?
Well, I'm quite prepared to... Of course, it's true that a lot of MPs have a tough fight in this election, and that's right. But look, I'm going to fight for every vote that I can get, because I think I've got a good record of standing up for the Highlands and delivering a strong economy and a fairer society through our work in government at the UK level. I've got a record to be proud of in that respect, and I'm going to make that argument. But I think the idea that you send a bunch of people who want to break up the United Kingdom and expect that's going to have a constructive effect on the way the United Kingdom is governed is just for the birds.
All right, well, now, let's just tap into your experience of 5 years of coalition government and answer Isabel's question, which is what would actually happen if these polls come out right and the SNP hold the balance? not the Liberal Democrats.
Well, the other parties have to speak for themselves.
No, but what do you think would happen as an observer of the political scene, which you might be?
I have to say, I think you would no more. I think you would no more put the SNP in charge of the United Kingdom than you would put UKIP in charge of the European Union. I don't actually think. I don't actually think that there's any evidence that they would seek to play a constructive role in actually making sure that we keep our recovery on track, that we deliver the changes that we need to see in this country.
Would you go back into coalition with the Tories?
Look, I've always said that we would talk to whichever party has the strongest mandate, because that's the democratic thing to do. If the people of the United Kingdom give one party or another the most seats, of course I'd like that to be the Liberal Democrats, but I recognise that is unlikely. And of course we would talk to those people first. But our test would be, can we form a coalition agreement, or an agreement that enables us to deliver some of the things like we've delivered in this Parliament, income tax cuts for millions of working people.
All right, let's not go through the mantra.
Well, it's very important.
I know, but we're talking about the outcome afterwards.
Yeah, but the outcome, David, is in terms of policies. And folks here haven't cast their votes yet.
No, but you're not here to electioneer for votes.
Well, I don't know. Come on.
Danny's point's a good one, David, because the stated aim of the SNP is to break up the United Kingdom. They're not keen to help govern the United Kingdom. They want to end the United Kingdom.
The woman on the end there. Yes. I want to hear from a member of the audience.
Humza, you said that you would do a deal with the Tories. So who would you rather have Prime Minister? Because there are only two people going to be Prime Minister. Who would you choose?
Oh, listen, that's like asking a choice of whether you want a poke in the eye or a punch in the arm. You know, I mean, it's hard like any of them to be. But look, I know the damage that the Conservatives. I know that the damage the Conservatives have done to Scotland. When Ruth Davidson says our stated aim is to break up the United Kingdom, actually our stated aim is to speak up and always will be, not just speak up for the Scottish people, but speak up for the poorest that don't have a voice. And we will do that with whatever party we can form a progressive alliance with.
OK. The woman there in pink. I'll come to you, Toby. Woman in pink there, yes. You.
There's an elephant in the room here that some of you aren't addressing. Why do the polls show that the SNP are liable to return 50, possibly? I don't think that so many maybe will be elected, but the SNP are very popular now. Why do the polls show that? That's what I would like to hear.
Well,
why
whether
do you
the
think?
polls are accurate, you mean, or why they think?
Why do you think that the Scottish people seem to have turned against your parties?
All right.
That's what I would like to know.
Toby Young, as an observer of this, what do you think?
Yeah. I feel a bit like I've got between husband and wife going through a really messy divorce. To go back to Isabel's question, I think how critical the SNP MPs are after the election will depend upon the outcome of the election. And I wouldn't rule out a small overall Conservative majority. I agree with the gentleman over there who said that actually the Conservatives have got a pretty good track record to fight on. This is the fastest growing economy, not just in Europe, but in the developed world. There are 1.85 million more jobs now in the UK than there were in 2010. More jobs have been created in Scotland than in the whole of France in this Parliament. So I think the government does have a pretty good track record to fight on. I think the only situation in which the SNP MPs will make a critical difference is in the unlikely event of Labour ending up as the largest single party. I think an overall majority for Labour is out of the question, but if they end up as the largest single party and could form a government with the support of the SNP, what Humza is proposing, which is a kind of a piecemeal, deal-by-deal arrangement, I think is a recipe for absolute chaos. I think that Ed Miliband in that situation would want to enter into some sort of pact, some sort of confidence and supply arrangement with the SNP. And I think the problem with that, the reason he hasn't ruled it out, but the problem with that is, as Ruth says, is that how can you go into government with a party that is going to hold you to ransom and which doesn't have the best interests of the United Kingdom at heart? It's a bit like inviting Guy Fawkes. It would be a bit like inviting Guy Fawkes to sit down at the cabinet table.
All right. Val.
All my life, all the time I have been on this planet, Scotland has voted to the left. I think Scotland has a fundamental sense of society, a fundamental sense of wanting to do the right thing, about being redistributive, about looking after the poor, all of these things. And for all of my life, that meant voting Labour. During the 2 years of the fight leading up to the referendum, Labour got right into bed with the Tories. And I think that the Scottish people are finding that very hard to get past. And what we saw... And I think what we're seeing now is the Labour Party in Scotland being punished for not being able to understand that they could support a no vote without having to get into bed with the Tories. And it now seems, from a Scottish perspective particularly, that the SNP are the party who do speak for the left. And I think if there is a substantial number of SNP members in the next Parliament, then, you know, with luck, if everything goes with the following wind, they can drag Labour back to the left and away from the politics of
I hear what Val says, and I've heard it many times before because I spend a lot of my time out in constituencies, chapping on doors and speaking to people, and I get that people are angry with the Labour Party, which is why over the next few days and weeks we've got to spell out why we're different, why we're committed to ending austerity.
But do you agree with her analysis that you got into bed with the Tories when you didn't actually need to in asking for a no vote?
Look, I disagree with 99% of what David Cameron stands for, and I had to work with him during the referendum, and I found that really uncomfortable. There's no denying that. And
you didn't have to. You could have taken a principled stand that wasn't in...
I understand that point of view, and there was a very clear yes campaign, a very clear no campaign that did create some unlikely alliances. You know, there were some people in the Yes campaign that were brought together. You had tax exiles and Tommy Sheridan lining up to share platforms. There are strange mixes of people that it brings together, but what I'm trying to say to you, Val, is that we have a duty now to show that we're different, that we're committed to ending poverty and to tackling inequality. And actually, hang on, Humza,
one long time in government to do that,
and we did. We lifted 200,000 kids out of poverty, 100,000 pensioners out of poverty.
Do you think you're answering her question, the woman in pink there, who said, why is it, do you think, that you've fallen from favour? Is that why?
Answering my question, sorry.
Let me address it. Say it again.
I don't think my question's been answered. If I could just agree with this gentleman over here that this constant mantra of vote SNP, get Tory, vote SNP, get Scotland, because we have voted... I'm quite an elderly person, but I've got a memory, and I have voted for the last 40 years. I voted Labour for a large part of that until the war in Iraq, and now I'm a member of the Scottish National Party, and we are hearing out on the streets, on the doorsteps, on the telephones, I will never vote Labour again. They have sold us out, and that's what we're
I'll try and answer your question if I can. And the reason I think that the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party are being punished in the polls right now is because you don't know whether to believe them or not. Because Danny's party is running away from their record in government, and the Labour Party is running away from their record in Better Together. I'm proud of the part I played in Better Together. Now, I know this is a mixed audience. I know many people here voted on the other side of it from me, and I absolutely respect people that were standing up and making that argument. I stood up and made the arguments that I believed in. And there's a reason why the polls that everyone's talking about, the Ashcroft polls, the Conservative vote in Scotland is actually going up, not going down. It's because people saw us stand up for what we believed in. And there's a lot of people in this audience that won't agree with me in politics. I absolutely understand that. But people know that when I'm saying that I'm passionate about something, it's because I really mean it. And I don't run away from anything I did in the Better Together campaign.
The man there was
I think it's high time we move away from this political dogma, either vote Labour or you get Conservative, and get to the real question. If the great amount of British people do vote the Conservative and they have to work with the SNP, that is what the people demand. It's not really in your position to say, no, we're not going to work with these people, because if in the last election I did campaign for Labour, and at this moment I'm quite a bit confused because I found the Labour policies not quite dealing with the issues that I wanted to address. And for the Conservative, I felt like they're not dealing with the issues that I want to address. Then, if I eventually vote for one, I would want to see a form of communication going on, other than this division that we're seeing around, this debate, really.
All right. OK, and you stay in the middle there. I'll come back to you on the panel in a moment. Just let me hear one or two members of the audience. Yousaf.
In the event of hung parliament, the SNP, Ms Sturgeon, has said that she will not do a deal with the Tories. Why will Ed Miliband not say unequivocally, no nonsense, that he will not do a deal with the SNP? Is it because they are already doing behind-the-scene talks? about removing Trident from Scotland, and perhaps another couple of years down the line, there's going to be another referendum at the behest of the SNP.
Okay, Kezia?
No, that's simply not the case. The reality of the situation is that we're trying to respect your rights as voters to cast a vote. And why would we carve it up behind the scenes in smoke-filled rooms and do deals? That's the very worst of politics. You go to the polling booth, you cast your vote, the country will speak, and then the day after that we'll have to work out what type of government we have. At the end of the day, only two people can be Prime Minister, David Cameron or Ed Miliband, and I'm desperate to know which one Humza wants to see in power.
Toby.
There's a clear answer to your question, and the reason Ed Miliband hasn't ruled it out yet is because he thinks it's his best hope of becoming Prime Minister, and he doesn't mind. He'll meet whatever conditions the SNP impose. If they want him to commit to an extra £180 billion of spending in the lifetime of the next Parliament, which is one of Nicola Sturgeon's red lines, he'll accept that. If they say give up our independent nuclear deterrent, sounds like he'll do that too. He's desperate to be PM. He thinks that's his only hope.
You think he'd give up the... Sorry, you're saying he'd give up the nuclear deterrent?
I think he'd be prepared to negotiate about that, yes.
What,
I don't think that's off the table.
Abandon the policy that Labour has fought over and then pursued
hang on, David.
There was a poll...
David, he sacrificed his own brother. Of course he'll sacrifice a policy.
50%. First of all, he's not going to take responsibility for that policy. 50% of the Parliamentary Labour Party are in favour of scrapping Parliament. 75% of candidates not yet in Parliament are in favour of scrapping Trident. So actually, the weight within his own party would be towards doing that and agreeing to that.
Danny Alexander.
I think that a lot of people in Scotland and across the rest of the United Kingdom find either the idea of the Tories in a majority governing by themselves or of Labour in a majority governing by themselves pretty scary, actually. When you look at the way in which the Tories want to go for cuts and austerity far beyond what is necessary to balance the books, which is what we're trying to do at the moment. When you look at the mess, the cluelessness that you see in the Labour Party and the heartlessness in the Conservative Party, it's no wonder that people are saying that's not what we want. All I'd say is, if you send a whole lot of SNP MPs to Westminster, they will not be trying to look at how can you govern the United Kingdom constructively, how can you make the changes that need to be, how can you make the changes that need to be made. I would say, if you want to keep the country on a straight and narrow, if you want to have a strong economy and a fair society, combine those two things. Actually, that's what the Liberal Democrats have been delivering over the last 5 years. We've made a bloody good job of it. I'm going to continue to fight on the basis of that record right the way through to the election.
I must respond on this, actually, because you're saying that the Liberal Democrats are the bastions of all morality, saying that they've created a fairer society. I'll tell you what, while you're in Glasgow, why don't you talk to the 71,000 people that have been in food banks in the last 6 months and ask them whether or not it's a fairer society? Or why don't you ask the 100,000 children that you're going to put into poverty by 2020? Let me just address this point very quickly, David. Actually, we've had Labour MPs this week, Gisela Stewart, saying the Labour Party should not rule out a grand coalition with the Tories. We've had Labour Party members of the Senior Policy Forum saying that Labour Party activists should be voting for the Tories. In half my lifetime, I've had Tory governments imposed on this country that we in Scotland have not voted for. All we want at the SNP is to have a progressive agenda. Yes, let's not harm people. Let's invest in people. Let's not agree to the austerity agenda. Let's invest in public services because people have been hammered, the poor have been hammered, and those at the top of society have got away with it because of this model.
Actually, what you would do is have the country borrowing more, getting into more debt. You'd set aside the plan that has got us to the economic recovery we have at the moment. It's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Scotland, here in Glasgow. A city deal for Glasgow, which is creating jobs, supporting businesses, enabling investment. These are the things that are making a difference to our economy. The idea that you'd have SNP MPs to carry that through.
I want more zero-hours contracts than we've ever seen in this country.
I'm going to take a couple more points from the audience. And then we'll move on. The man in spectacles in the second row from the back, please.
We're going to end up with more pandas, and we're going to have Labour and Conservatives put together in Scotland.
How many pandas have you got?
Two
You've got
so
two
far.
pandas, haven't you?
We might breed this year, so we might have three.
You might have three by election day. OK. And let me just see. I'll take 1 point from... Yes, Yousaf there on at the top there.
I can't understand why Mr Miliband is so utterly unprincipled. If he will not... because if the SNP will not deal with the Conservatives and the Conservatives won't deal with the SNP, if Labour turned round and said no, they wouldn't lose 40 MPs because the SNP would be utterly irrelevant in Scotland. So for him to become Prime Minister, this unprincipled individual is sacrificing 40 people in his own party. I think that's scandalous.
So you think all right? You think simply that if he said he won't do a deal with the SNP under any circumstance, the Labour vote would rise in Scotland?
I think it would, because the SNP would be irrelevant.
All right, well, we'll make a last point there. Why doesn't he do that?
I just think that completely disrespects voters. I think what we want to do is campaign for a Labour majority government. And I tell you this point, coalition seemed like a good thing until Danny teamed up with David Cameron. I think what we need is a strong majority government that can govern for this country to tackle the poverty that we're talking about. Now, I think...
That worked so well last time, didn't it?
Well, actually it did, and it did a hell of a lot better job than you did. A awful lot better job.
All right. OK, let's go on to another question. Now, just before we do, we're going to be in Leeds next week, and the week after that in Croydon in South London. The details of how to apply to come to Question Time are there on the screen if you want to make a note of them, and I'll pull them up again at the end of the programme. This question now, please, from Stephen Smith.
Do we need stronger laws to prevent hate preaching on British university campuses?
Do we need stronger laws to prevent hate preaching on British university campuses? And there's been talk from the Conservatives after Mohammed Mwazi's the revelation that he was at Westminster University and they'd had, I think, 22 people come and speak on an extremist platform, that there should be more done to stop this. Humza, what's your view?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks, David, for calling him Mohammed Mwazi, because I've been frustrated by the media's caricature of him as jihadi John, as though he's just your mate Johnny from down the road. So I appreciate the fact that all of us should agree to call him Mohammed Mwazi and not trivialise any of the brutality of the murders that he's committed. In terms of the event, universities have to be a space for academic freedom, but of course the governments and security services have a job to do to ensure our nation's security. Just a month ago, all of us in this panel were joined together, everybody in this panel, joined in solidarity after the disgraceful attacks in Charlie Hebdo. And we were right to say that freedom of speech is sacrosanct to us. And we must defend the right to freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech is easy to defend when it's something we agree with. But when it's something we disagree with, of course, that's when the challenge is more difficult. My appeal to governments is, of course, the job of national security is the most important job any government will ever face. But let's do it in a way that we do not give those who look to radicalise any more ammunition by introducing any draconian legislation. Because, remember, it was often said about internment that internment was the greatest recruiting sergeant the IRA ever had. And the last point I want to make is this. There will be many far-right groups, as we've seen just this week in Newcastle, like Pegida and EDL, the SDL, the BNP and the National Front, who want to come up here and sow the seeds of division between our communities. All of us, whether you voted yes or no, whether you're Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat or nothing, all of us have a job to ensure that we say, not in our name, we will not be divided, no Passaran, not here, not ever.
Let's be clear what we're talking about here. Preachers, hate preachers who advocate violence are already banned from British university campuses. We're talking about people who are advocating extremism of various kinds, but not violent extremism. Should they be prohibited from talking in Britain's universities? And I think unequivocally, no, they should not. I think that we have to be very clear that we believe in and stand up for free speech, and as Humza says, that means tolerating people whose views we disagree with, in some cases whose views we find deeply offensive. We don't have a right not to be offended. And if that means having to listen to hate preachers who aren't advocating violence but who are advocating views we find extremely unpalatable, then so be it. The problem with banning them is you're not going to stop their views having any influence, you're going to make them more influential. Those views are going to become, they're going to go underground, they can be found on the internet at the click of a mouse anyway. The way to defeat violent extremism and non-violent extremism is by engaging these people in open debate and showing them just where they're wrong.
Ruth Davidson, the Conservative Party, both Theresa May and Grant Shapps, have been quite critical of other parties on this issue, as saying that they're implying that they're a bit soft on the issue. Do you think that's true?
I have to say I've not looked at any of their comments at all, but I hope that this is something we can all agree on, actually. And I'm with both Humza and Toby on this one. I mean, I think it's really easy when something is frightening or we don't understand it or we're scared by it to say, well, let's just legislate to make it go away. And actually, you can't legislate for something like this. And very similar to the last two speakers, I think when it comes to this idea, I think if we restrict our own freedoms in response to people who wish to change our society, then we've let them win. And actually, we're better than that.
So what do you make of the new law, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, which was passed last month, which says that universities and other authorities have to, quote, prevent people from being drawn into terrorism? I mean, what kind of law is that, and how do you enforce it?
Well, I think as a society we all have a duty to make sure that if we see troubling behaviour, that we are able to intervene, that we feel empowered to do so.
Troubling behaviour being what?
Well, I mean, I think it's very difficult to be prescriptive, and that's why I've struggled in some cases with laws we've had up here on things like sectarian violence at football, which is on a different scale, but is in the same way. You know, there have been changes that we've seen in our country. We have had people in our country who have acted in ways that we don't understand, that have been violent, have sought to do harm to others, whether it's on our shores or whether that has been abroad. And the security services are doing their very best, and they need all the help they can get. And if people in universities do see people who have advocated extreme behaviour that has been non-violent straying into advocating violent behaviour, then that's something that I think the authorities should be allowed to do.
Your party chairman, Grant Shapps, actually said Vince Cable, Liberal Democrat, doesn't want to do what the Conservatives want to do, which is that on campus we the Conservatives, don't want radical preachers saying things which incite violence, which can lead to radicalisation.
Well, I have no idea what spat Vince Cable has had with Grant Shapps, but I don't think there's anybody that wants to see people advocating violence anywhere, that's on university campuses or wherever.
Maybe you can enlighten us what the spat was about, if there is a disagreement.
I can try. So incitement to murder, incitement to terrorism, incitement to violence is already against the law. So if someone, as these guys said, if someone goes to a university and makes a speech or enters into a debate and encourages people to kill other people, they are already in breach of the law, and the full force of the law should be felt against those people. The debate is about, should this notion of extremism be widened so that someone in government can say, this person who maybe is saying things that we fundamentally disagree with, who is spreading an ideology that we disagree with, should be banned from speaking, even if they're not quite crossing that legal line. And my view is that in those cases, actually, those people are trying to destroy the freedom and the democracy that we enjoy in this country. And the idea that we would make those people's job harder by reducing the level of freedom of speech we have in this country, I think is wrong. I think that we should defeat those people in open debate, as we have with the BNP, as we have with other extremists in this country over the years, and beat them using the democracy and the freedom that they want to destroy.
But that's not there.
With a local council issuing homework describing Palestinians as terrorists, would it not also be close to say that government organisations themselves are promoting hate speech?
By doing what, sorry?
There was a homework package given out by a local council recently that labelled Palestinians as terrorists. Is this not?
All right. Val McDermid?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, but I would agree with Humza that repression always leads to rebellion of one sort or another. But I think surely it's our place to deal with this, as Danny says, head on. We should be more vocal. We should be more persuasive when we're faced with these kind of speech. And I think what we also have to think about is the bigger picture of a society that is more inclusive, that doesn't make people feel like outsiders, that doesn't make people feel like they have no stake. That's our task, is to build the kind of society where everyone turns around to people preaching hate and says, go away, we're not interested.
Kezia.
I agree entirely with what Humza set out with, and I think actually the whole panel would on those terms that we've got. And it's the power of argument that's going to defeat this type of thinking of radicalisation and extremism. We've got to use the power of argument, and our universities are actually the place to do it. And the key is integration in education, and I'm incredibly proud of the record of the universities that we've got here in Scotland. It's one of the best things we've got is that power of free thinking and thought, and long may it continue.
So none of you want tougher laws on this? You think
No,
the law is...
no.
That's right. And the woman in the second row there, you.
I think it's absolutely hypocritical that last week we were talking about the two girls who have been made to believe this propaganda. I think it's a scheme to get these young women to go over and join whatever terrorist group it is. And I think to sit and say last week there's something that needs to be done, this is absolutely shocking, this is terrible, and then to go, well, we can't do anything about it because it's freedom of speech. If there's something to be done, we need to have a solution for that and not just dismiss it and turn a blind eye to the scheme that is going on to dupe young people into going over to Syria.
But the reason that we know from examining the social media activities of those girls that they became radicalised on social media, not because they were listening to hate preachers in mosques or at universities.
It fuels it. It's just it's the same kind of thing. It doesn't matter whether it's online or if it's in a university campus. They're still fueling that.
But surely the way to dissuade girls like that from going out to join these unbelievably murderous, barbaric groups in the Middle East is to actually engage them in conversation, to tell them why we think they shouldn't be doing that, why it's not really in their interests to go and become the sex slaves of these murdering savages who are enslaving women all over the Middle East and forcing them to undergo female genital mutilation and all kinds of other horrors. I mean, I think, 25 minutes with those women would probably be enough for anyone on this panel to dissuade them from doing what they did. But we didn't have that opportunity because we aren't debating these things openly.
Okay. All right. We'll go on to another question now. Gary Crawford, please. Question from Gary Crawford.
Why are most of Scotland's accident and emergency units missing their waiting time targets so badly?
A complaint about A&E targets, which actually came up in the Scottish Parliament today. Ruth Davidson. Why is Scotland missing its targets, and to what extent is it?
This is really interesting. I was at one of our largest A&E departments just earlier this week at the ERI in Edinburgh. I was chatting to doctors and nurses there, and part of it is sheer weight of numbers. There has been a lot of work that's gone on to try and make sure that, for example, having small injury clinics away from A&E means that you take some of the people away from that, to look at other chronic illnesses that sometimes approach A&E, to look at them in other areas of the health service. But right now we have 83,500 more people per year going to A&E departments in our country than we did sort of 6-7 years ago, and that creates a strain on the system. So I think we have to think quite cleverly about how we make sure that our out-of-hours care in other areas help. And one of the big issues, if I could just have one more second, one of the big issues that the doctors and nurses said to me was the problem that they have at the front end, at the walking through the door end, is actually problems in the hospital at the back end. So if you have an older person, say, that comes in having had a fall in a nursing home or in their own home, if that happens on a Tuesday, then that's okay because they can patch them up and they can make sure they've got an extra care package in their home, or there's enough people on at the care home to look after them when they go back there. If it happens on a Friday, they have to stay in hospital because there isn't that care there for them. So we have to look, I think, a lot more at how we integrate social care and medical care so that these people aren't staying in hospital if they are able to go home, and then you can get more people through, if that makes any sense.
So it's not a political issue for you, because it's interesting, in Wales people blame Labour, in England they blame the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, and you as a Tory in Scotland are blaming nobody, but just saying it's a fact of life.
No, I'm not saying it's a fact of life. What I'm saying is this is how it's being reported to me. There are decisions that politicians can make, for example, spinning out other services elsewhere. Okay. The Scottish Government said 6 years ago that they were going to bring A&E numbers down through these sorts of measures. They haven't done it. They've recognised that they've not done it. They put in a £50 million fund at the end of last year to now try and get hold of this. I support that. I think that's the right thing to do. I wish they'd done it 6 years ago, but never mind. But I think we also have to listen to the health and clinical professionals, because we can try and score points off each other on A&E if we want, but that's not helping the patients, and it's sure as heck not helping the doctors and nurses who are performing heroics above and beyond the call of their shift every single day that they go in, and they need more thought about how we can make this easier for them.
It seems to me that one significant reason for the problems with accident and emergency is the extraordinary strain that's being put in primary care services with general practitioners. It seems to me that they're the unsung heroes of the health service, and that there are simply not enough general practitioners or enough resources being given to general practitioners in local communities.
Kezia.
I'm afraid I would disagree on that point. I think part of the problem is the way that GPs operate, the fact that you can't go to the GP at night or you can't go at the weekend, and some people, maybe they're worried about their kids or they're worried about their elder parents, feel the need to go to A&E rather than wait for the doctor in the morning. But let me say this, the biggest problem...
But was it not the Labour government which did something about changing GP contracts, and that's why they can't see GP at night?
Here's the thing, for all the heroics of NHS staff, and they are tremendous, it's funding that's the issue. There isn't enough money going to the NHS, and in actual fact, David Cameron, of all people, is spending more on the NHS in England than Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are on the NHS in Scotland.
Perhaps you could answer my question.
So,
the contracts with the GPs, you were saying people can't see their doctors at night. Was that not because your government changed the contract with GPs, and therefore we can't phone up in the middle of the night and speak to a general practitioner that knows us?
Well, look, there's a big story in the papers today about NHS 24 and the struggles that NHS 24 are having just answering the calls and making sure that there's medical practitioners on the end of the line. But here's the thing, we can talk about it as a problem, and it's a massive problem. We've got an A&E crisis in this country, or we can fix it. And we're proposing to fix it, because what we're talking about as the Labour Party is using the tax system. We want to tax people who have mansions worth £2 million and use the money to employ more nurses in Scotland. That's the progressive thing to do.
How much will you raise in Glasgow?
Well, exactly. That's the point, David. Can I just say, that is exactly the point, because what we're doing is that we are pooling and sharing the wealth of the United Kingdom and spending it where it's needed. So there'll be more nurses in Scotland than there are actually people paying this tax. We want to employ 1,000 more nurses. That will cost 20... I can't see the person that's talking that. It'll cost £29 million. That's funded through the mansion tax.
1,000 more than the SNP, or 1,000 more than now?
It's 1,000 more than now, and it's £20 million.
Wasn't that not what you said last time? It was 1,000 more than the SNP will provide.
Let me say to you,
that's exactly
I talk to doctors, I've been visiting hospitals. You've got Dr Martin McKechnie, an expert in A&E medicine, saying that the hospitals are on their knees. It's not a winter crisis we're facing, it's a bed crisis.
Okay.
The NHS is under-resourced. We can fix that by using taxes. If Humza was a progressive, he'd support this, because it's about redistributing wealth, but he won't.
The woman on the right here. Humza, I'll come to you. Yes, the woman.
As a medical student, I think there are a lot of facets to this issue, and I think it's very, very ignorant of you to ignore that lady's point about general practice. There's a multitude of research. You did dismiss it, and there's a multitude of research showing the crucial role primary care plays in our society, especially with an ageing population, points made about social care. And if you cut general practice, the knock-on effect is what we are now seeing in accident and emergency across the country. I think there are additional factors. When we're all medical students, when we go on placement to A&E, it's heartbreaking to see people do not like working there. It's so stressful, and you want to help, and it's hard. And I think the Conservative government have not helped in that. They have cut and cut and cut, and this idea of economic growth, that only helps if it goes down to the bottom, and it isn't at the moment. Okay. People are trying their hardest, and it isn't working.
Don't
Well, I think the lady who just spoke is right. This is a complicated issue. I'm not in the Scottish Parliament. I wasn't there for the debate that took place today, but I know from my own experience as a constituency MP in the Highlands that this is a serious problem, both in A&E and as one of the members of the audience made the point about issues in social care, meaning that sometimes beds in hospitals being occupied for longer than they should be, which makes it harder to move people through the system, which means that it's harder to get space in A&E. But when you hear about stories about folk in Glasgow Victoria Hospital waiting for 20 hours in a porter cabin before they get seen, something has to be done about that. And again, I can approach it from the perspective of a Highland MP. In the Highlands, what we've found with NHS Highland is, despite there being a funding formula to allocate money to the NHS fairly across the whole of Scotland, actually the Highlands has been consistently underfunded for the last 5 years since that formula was put in place. And from a Highland perspective, I would like
Your
to see...
Chief Secretary is the Treasury, for goodness sake.
I am, but
I mean, why haven't you done something about it?
Because it's a devolved matter that is... The
money that comes to Scotland is not a devolved matter, it's a matter for the
It's not
Westminster
been passed
Government.
on, David.
The money that is devolved to Scotland is done, at the moment, automatically through the Barnett formula. There'll be a new funding system put in place when we devolve the additional taxes that are going to be devolved to
and you expected it to be spent on your Highland hospitals, and it wasn't.
But the allocations of money for the health service within Scotland, how much is spent in total, and then where it's spent within Scotland, are a matter entirely for Scottish ministers. That's devolution. It's a devolved issue. What I'm saying is...
But it's dependent on how much you spend on the NHS in England.
No, it's not.
The Barnett formula gives... If you add a chunk to the NHS in England, a chunk comes to Scotland under the Barnett formula.
The total budget for Scotland is determined by the Barnett formula.
And therefore includes what you spend on the NHS.
But how much is spent on the NHS and on education and on local government...
It needn't go the way you want it,
It's decided by ministers
not all
in
of the health
Edinburgh.
money that's come up to Scotland has been passed on by the Scottish Government. That's what the IFS said.
And
in the right to
then-
referendum. They run the analysis, £700 million
And then on
gap.
top of that, the decisions that are made by SNP ministers in Edinburgh are not allocating that money according to their own formula fairly within Scotland. So NHS Highland has been shortchanged year after year by your ministerial colleagues.
Humza.
Well, clearly people in the Highlands don't believe that. That's why the latest poll showing you getting a thumping up there. But
well, they do believe it. Why your own councillors on the Highland Council voted for a motion saying you and your ministers should actually provide the right money for that
now,
NHS
Humza must have a chance. We've only got a couple of minutes
yeah,
left.
well, on the reason why Kezia got such a woeful response of complete, people couldn't believe what you were saying on that is because people are tired of politicians just playing politics with the NHS. Ruth's answer to the question was actually quite constructive, and I thank her for that constructive tone, because I'm not the type of politician that just because I'm in government to say, look, the job is done. The job isn't done, but let's recognise progress has been made. Over that very difficult winter period when you have a lot of admissions coming in, double the admissions in some hospital boards, we met that 90% of people were seen within that 4-hour waiting time target. On top of that, more investment has gone into the NHS for the first time, taking it above 12 billion. But is there work still to do? Yes, of course. But what I can't allow, what we don't want in Scotland, is, of course, the creeping privatisation that we're seeing south of the border. Let's always keep our NHS public.
I've got to stop. I've got to stop. Toby?
I'd like to pick Kezia up on the mention tax point. I was glad that the audience groaned when she mentioned that. Of course, it's not fair to impose a tax which is mainly going to affect people in London to pay for more nurses in Scotland, any more than it would be to impose a tax that mainly affected people in Glasgow to pay for more nurses in England. But don't hold out too much hope for how many nurses the mention tax is going to pay for, because the Labour Party have already spent the mention tax 3 times. Apparently it's going to enable them to solve the housing crisis, it's going to enable them to reduce the deficit without actually, whilst at the same time increasing public spending, and apparently it's going to enable them to save the NHS, even though estate agents say it isn't actually going to raise any money at all. The mention tax is Labour's latest magic money tree.
That last point for you.
Well, it's hard for me to admit this, but I do agree with most of what Ruth said. But I also agree with what the lady in the audience said about the importance of frontline GP services that are available when people need them. But I also think that this country has got historic health problems that are to do with the way that we live. And I think one of the ways that we need to address very clearly in the future is to try and spend more time, energy and focus on prevention.
Okay. Loud applause and whoops from the medical students on my right. We have to stop there, I'm afraid. Our hour's up. Now, I said we were going to be in Leeds next week. We have Charles Kennedy for the Liberal Democrats. We have the Green Party leader, Natalie Bennett. And we have Ian Hislop, the editor of Private Eye, among those on the panel. The week after that, it's Croydon in South London. And if you want to come to either programme, that's Leeds next week, Croydon the week after. There's the address on the screen, or you can go to call us on 0330 123 9988, so you can go to the website or whichever way you like. Now, of course, this debate is stopping here for the moment, but it goes on Radio 5 Live, on Question Time Extra Time with John Pienaar and Stephen Nolan, and I hope you enjoy that. But my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came here to Glasgow to take part in this edition tonight. Until next Thursday from Question Time. Good night.
He always avoided publicly linking his women with his art. Now, for the first time, the people who knew him best